My name is Maya Callahan. I was 26 years old, 8 months pregnant, and standing in the doorway of the apartment we'd shared for 3 years, watching my husband load his guitar and his PlayStation into the back of another woman's car. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even look at me. He just drove away. And the only sound left in the world was the hum of the refrigerator and the baby kicking so hard against my ribs, I had to grab the door frame to stay standing. 19 years. That's how long I raised our son alone. 19 years of double shifts and school plays and fevers at 2 a.m. and homework I didn't understand but figured out anyway. 19 years of being both parents in one body, one bank account, one prayer. And then one Tuesday morning in October, a man I barely recognized anymore showed up at my front door with a lawyer's card and a story about wanting to be there for his son. He had no idea what he was walking into, and by the time he figured it out, it was too late. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. This channel exists because of people who've lived through something that should have broken them and didn't. If that's you, you're in the right place, and I want you to drop your location and your local time in the comments right now. It blows my mind every single week that someone in Auckland, and someone in Accra, and someone in a 3 a.m. bedroom in Ohio are all watching the same story at the same time. Tell me where you are. I'll be reading. Now let me take you back. Back to the spring of 2004, back to Clarksville, Tennessee, which is one of those cities that sounds sleepier than it is, a military town, Fort Campbell just up the road. The kind of place where people arrive because of orders and stay because they fall in love or run out of options. I was 22 years old, recently graduated from Austin Peay State University, with a degree in social work that I was enormously proud of, and not entirely sure what to do with. I had an apartment on Dover Road that cost $485 a month, a used 1999 Honda Civic the color of old mustard, and a job at a family services nonprofit that paid $28,000 a year and made me feel, most days, like I was doing something that mattered. My mother, Diane Callahan, was a woman I loved deeply and understood imperfectly. She was the kind of mother who worked hard and meant well, and expressed both of those things in ways that sometimes felt more like pressure than love. She was a licensed practical nurse, 30 years on her feet in a cardiac unit, and she had opinions about everything: my career, my apartment, my car, my hair. She wasn't cruel. I want to be careful about that. She was just certain about what a good life looked like, and certain that I wasn't quite building one fast enough. My father, Robert Callahan, had been out of the picture since I was 11. Not completely gone. He resurfaced every few Christmases with a card, and a Barnes & Noble gift card like punctuation at the end of a sentence that never quite made sense. My mother had raised me and my younger sister Trisha mostly on her own, and she had done it well enough that neither of us went hungry or unloved, even if we sometimes went unseen. Trisha is 3 years younger than me and has always been the version of me that came out smoother. Same brown eyes, same wide forehead, but where I have always been what my mother diplomatically calls intense, Trisha is easy. She laughs quickly. She forgives quickly. She has always been the one people gravitate toward at parties, and I have always been the one holding a drink by the window, thinking too hard about something no one else is thinking about. I say this without bitterness. Trisha is one of the best people I know, but growing up, she was also the one my mother worried about less, which in practice meant she was the one my mother fussed over more. New clothes for Trisha's cheerleading competitions while I bought my own school supplies with babysitting money. My mother at every single one of Trisha's dance recitals. I counted. I can't help it. I counted. But missing my college graduation because Trisha had a stomach bug and needed someone with her. I was 22 years old, standing in an auditorium in a rented gown next to people whose parents were crying and taking pictures, and I called my mother from the parking lot afterward, and she said, "I'm so proud of you, Maya. I just couldn't leave your sister." I told myself it didn't hurt. I told myself it for about 5 years before I stopped. I don't tell you this to paint my mother as a villain. I tell you this because it matters for who I became. When you grow up being the one who handles things, you develop a certain posture, a forward lean, a readiness, a refusal to ask for help because asking has so rarely worked out for you. That posture kept me upright through some very hard years. It also made it difficult, in my 20s, to recognize when a man was taking advantage of it. His name was Daniel Reeves. Danny. He was 28 when I met him, a musician in the soft definition of the word. He played guitar beautifully, gigged on weekends at a bar called the Rusty Nail on Madison Street, and worked weekdays at a FedEx distribution center to cover the gap between dreams and rent. He was tall and lanky with dark hair that curled behind his ears, and a laugh that arrived without warning, the kind of laugh that makes you feel like you've just said the smartest thing in the room. I met him at a friend's birthday party in July of 2004. We talked for 4 hours. I drove home on I-24 at 1 a.m. with all the windows down, already in trouble. We moved in together 8 months later. My mother disapproved, which was predictable. Trisha loved him, which was also predictable. Danny was charming in the way that is invisible until it isn't. He made you feel chosen when he looked at you, and when he looked elsewhere, you found yourself working to get that feeling back. I know that now. I was less fluent in that language in 2005. I was just a girl who'd grown up feeling slightly off to the side of things, and here was someone who looked directly at me. That was enough. That was more than enough. By 2006, we were engaged. The ring cost $400 from a jewelry store in the Governor Square Mall, a thin band with a small round diamond that I thought was perfect, and Danny apologized for. "I'll get you a real one when the music takes off," he said. I told him I didn't care about the ring, and I didn't. I cared about the man. I cared about the life I thought we were building. We got married in November of 2006 at the Clarksville courthouse. Small ceremony. My mother came. Trisha came. 2 of Danny's bandmates came. We had dinner afterward at Applebee's, and someone's beer got knocked over, and we all laughed. And that is the memory I kept. That table, that laughter, that feeling of something beginning. I held it for a long time after everything else fell apart. By the following spring, I was pregnant. It was not entirely planned, but it was not unwelcome. Danny said he was happy. He said it in the way people say things when they are mostly happy and a little terrified. And at the time, I read it as mostly happy. He came to the first ultrasound. He held my hand. He told his bandmates at the Rusty Nail, and they raised their glasses and whooped, and I stood in the doorway of that bar in my second trimester glow thinking, yes, this is it. This is how it goes. The second trimester was when things started to shift in ways I didn't name yet. Danny started staying out later after gigs. Not dramatically later. An hour, sometimes 2. He started being on his phone in ways that had a new texture to them. Phone face down on the table, screen dimming before I could see it. Small things, things that could be nothing. I told myself they were nothing. I was tired. I was the size of a small planet. I was working full-time at the nonprofit, and coming home to cook dinner and doing the math on maternity leave and how our $2,400 a month combined income was going to stretch into 3 people and a new set of expenses we hadn't fully mapped out. I didn't have bandwidth for doubt, so I set it aside. Her name, I found out much later, was Cassie Holloway. She was 23, recently moved to Clarksville from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and she had started coming to the open mic nights at the Rusty Nail in February of 2007. The same month I hit 26 weeks and the baby started responding to music by kicking whenever I played anything on the kitchen radio. She and Danny had been talking since March. By May, it was something else. I found out the way you find out these things. Not by snooping, not by a dramatic confrontation, but by accident. A Saturday morning in July. Danny was in the shower. His phone was on the kitchen counter. It buzzed, and the screen lit up with a message that I wasn't looking for and couldn't unsee. I stood there with a bowl of cereal in one hand and his phone glowing on the counter, and I read 7 words that took apart 3 years of my life. I didn't cry right away. That's something I've noticed about genuine shock. It doesn't arrive with tears. It arrives with a kind of Arctic clarity, a sudden stillness, like all the noise in your body stops at once. I set down the cereal. I walked to the bedroom doorway. I stood there until the shower turned off. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and resolved nothing. He admitted it. He apologized. He said it didn't mean anything. Which is one of those phrases people say when a thing means everything it was never supposed to mean. I asked him to leave. He said he needed time to think. I said I needed him to leave tonight. He left. He came back the next day with flowers I didn't want and words I couldn't trust. And because I was 32 weeks pregnant and exhausted and scared and still, underneath all of it, in love with the idea of the family we were supposed to be, I let him come back. That is a thing I have had to forgive myself for. We tried, for 6 weeks, to rebuild something. We went to one couples counseling session at a therapist's office on Commerce Street that cost $120 and produced nothing except an hour of Danny explaining himself and me nodding in a way that was more survival than agreement. He left for good on a Tuesday in September. Labor Day had just passed. I was 8 months and 1 week pregnant. He packed his guitar, his PlayStation, his good winter jacket, and approximately $340 in cash from our joint checking account. He drove away in Cassie Holloway's car. I stood in the doorway. The baby kicked. The refrigerator hummed. My mother came the next day. She sat at my kitchen table and said, "Well, Maya, you always did rush into things." And then she put the kettle on and made tea and held my hand and cried a little, which was the most she had ever cried in front of me. And we sat there together in my broken apartment, and I felt underneath the devastation something else. A small, quiet hardening. Not bitterness, not anger, just the knowledge arriving like a compass needle finding north, that I was going to have to carry this, and that I was strong enough to carry it, and that carrying it would be the whole job for a while. If you've ever had to make peace with doing something completely alone, that was never supposed to be done alone, drop a hand in the comments. I want to know I'm not talking to empty air. My son was born on October 14th, 2007. At Gateway Medical Center in Clarksville. He came into the world at 6:17 in the morning after 11 hours of labor, and they put him on my chest, and he was warm and miraculous and smelled like something I had never smelled before. Something primal and specific that I still cannot describe, except to say it smelled like mine. I named him Elijah Robert Callahan. Not Reeves, not his father's name. Mine. My mother was in the room. Trisha was in the waiting area with a gas station balloon and a bag of salt and vinegar chips. Danny was not there. He sent a text 3 days later. It said, "Heard he's healthy? That's good." 6 words? For his own son? I saved that text for 19 years. I don't know entirely why. Evidence, maybe? Of a particular kind of absence. The early years were hard in the ordinary, grinding way that single parenthood is hard. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just relentless. I went back to work 6 weeks after Elijah was born because I had exhausted my sick leave and my FMLA, and we needed the income. My neighbor, a 60-year-old retired teacher named Gloria Hutchins, who lived in the apartment below me, watched Elijah in the mornings until I could get him into subsidized daycare at $375 a month, which was the tightest financial period of my life up to that point. I was making $31,000 a year by then, after a raise. I had two $14 in savings. I ate a lot of pasta. Danny paid child support sporadically. $287 a month, as ordered by the Montgomery County Family Court in March of 2008. Some months it arrived on time. More often it didn't. I took him back to court twice in 4 years. The second time, the judge threatened him with contempt and he got current for about 8 months, and then drifted again. I learned to plan around his absence rather than into his presence. I stopped expecting the $287. When it arrived, it was a windfall. When it didn't, nothing changed. He saw Elijah 4 times before Elijah turned 5. I'm not estimating. 4 times. Once at Christmas in 2008, when he showed up with a toy truck that Elijah was slightly too young for, and a new haircut that made him look nothing like himself. Once in the spring of 2009, when he picked Elijah up for an afternoon and brought him back 3 hours later smelling of cigarette smoke, which I had not smelled on Elijah before, and found deeply clarifying. Once at Elijah's second birthday party, which I threw at a public park on a Saturday in October, I had spent $73 on decorations and a homemade cake. 8 people came, and Danny arrived 45 minutes late and left before the cake. And once, the last time, in the fall of 2010 when Elijah was almost 3, Danny called to say he was in town and could he stop by. And he did, and Elijah, who had Duplo blocks spread all over the living room floor, looked up at this man standing in the doorway, and then looked back at his blocks, unimpressed, and continued building. Danny stood there for a moment and then sat on the floor and tried to play, and Elijah tolerated it the way toddlers tolerate things that are mildly interesting but not especially relevant. Danny left after an hour. I walked him to the door, he said. "He doesn't really know me, does he?" It wasn't a question. I said, "No, he doesn't." Danny nodded and put his hands in his jacket pockets and walked down the stairs, and that was the last time I saw Daniel Reeves for 19 years. There were lawyers' letters in 2012 from a new attorney Danny had apparently retained in Nashville. Something about wanting to formalize visitation rights. I responded through my own attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Okafor, who charged me $150 an hour and was worth considerably more. We proposed a visitation schedule. Danny's attorney responded twice and then went quiet. The case dissolved without resolution, which is to say Danny's stated desire to be present did not survive contact with the actual requirements of presence. I filed that away too. The paper trail of his intentions, thin as it was. I want you to sit with something for a second, because I know some of you right now are thinking, why didn't she try harder to make him be in his son's life? And I want to answer that honestly, because I did try. I called, I left messages, I sent photos of Elijah, his first steps, his first day of kindergarten, a photo of him in a tiny Halloween costume at age 4 that was so purely joyful it should have broken something open in anyone who saw it. I sent those photos to a phone number that received them without response. At some point, somewhere around the time Elijah was 7 and started asking questions I had to answer, I made a decision. I was not going to spend my son's childhood chasing a man who had chosen to be absent. I was going to build a world big enough that the absence wasn't a hole, just a closed door in a house with many other rooms. Type builder in the comments if you've ever had to do this, if you've ever had to turn a subtraction into a construction project. Here is what I built. I went back to school at 31, evenings and Saturdays, while Elijah was in elementary school. I got my MSW, my Master of Social Work, from Tennessee State University in Nashville, commuting 2 nights a week and surviving on cold coffee and the particular determination of someone who knows exactly what is at stake. I graduated in 2013 and within a year had moved into a clinical supervisor role at a nonprofit in Nashville called Second Step Services, which served families in crisis, domestic violence, housing insecurity, child welfare, with a staff I was enormously proud to lead. My salary by 2014 was $58,000. By 2017, it was $74,000. By 2020, it was $89,000. I tell you these numbers not to brag, but because numbers are the language of survival. They mean, I did not drown. They mean, I built a floor, and then a ceiling, and then more floor. Elijah grew in ways that still astonish me when I stop long enough to think about them. He was a quiet child who became a thoughtful teenager, deliberate, observant, funny in the dry, understated way that takes people by surprise. He got his grandfather Robert's wide forehead, my brown eyes, and somehow, from no discernible source, an absolute gift for mathematics. By middle school, he was in advanced classes. By high school, he was competing in state-level math Olympiad competitions and placing in the top 10. His sophomore year at Hillwood High School in Nashville, he won first place in the regional science fair with a project on probability modeling and epidemiology that his teacher described to me in an email as genuinely sophisticated work. I printed that email. I still have it in a folder. He also played guitar. He had found Danny's old acoustic. I had kept it in a closet. Don't ask me why. Some instinct toward completeness. When he was around 10 years old and had taught himself to play off YouTube tutorials with a focus that was almost unnerving to watch. He was good, genuinely good. But he played it like a hobby, like a private pleasure, not like a destiny. He didn't confuse talent with vocation the way his father had. That felt like a mercy. He asked about Danny more as he got older, as children do. I answered everything he asked. I didn't editorialize. I told him, "Your father and I got married young and grew apart." I told him, "Your father chose not to be involved, and that was his choice, not yours." I told him, "You are not missing something because of him. You are whole." I told him this at 7 and 10 and 12 and 14, and at each age he received it differently, with different questions, and I answered those questions the best I could. At 16 he told me he didn't really want to know more about Danny. "It just makes me tired thinking about it," he said, and I understood that. The exhaustion of trying to make sense of someone else's abandonment. You can only think about a closed door for so long before you have to turn around and face the rest of the house. My own life filled in around Elijah, slowly and with intention. I started running when he was in middle school, not because I was passionate about running, but because I needed something that was purely physical and purely mine. I ran my first half marathon when I was 40. I had a relationship in 2015 and 2016 with a man named Marcus Webb, a high school history teacher in Nashville, that was good and warm and ended mutually when he took a position in Portland, and neither of us wanted long distance badly enough to make it work. We parted as friends. I have him in my phone still. We text sometimes around the holidays. That relationship taught me that I was capable of something steady, that I hadn't been wrecked by Danny in ways that couldn't be repaired. That was valuable. More valuable than I knew how to say at the time. By the time Elijah was 17, I had purchased a house, a 3-bedroom Craftsman on Westbrook Avenue in the Sylvan Park neighborhood of Nashville. I put $47,000 down. I cried in the car after the closing, not dramatically, just quietly, with the keys in my hand, thinking about that $214 in savings I'd had when Elijah was born, and the distance between that number and this moment. Some distances can only be understood from the far side of them. And then came October of 2026. I remember the morning clearly because I had run 6 miles before sunrise and had come home feeling that particular clean-brained satisfaction that only exists after early morning exercise. And I was in the kitchen making eggs when Elijah called down the stairs. He was visiting for the weekend from Vanderbilt, where he was a sophomore studying applied mathematics on a partial merit scholarship. "Mom, there's someone at the door." I assumed it was a delivery. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to the front door. Standing on my porch was a man who was 60 years old if he was a day, wearing a good jacket and expensive shoes, with gray at his temples, and a posture that tried to project confidence and landed somewhere closer to practiced calm. He had lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in 2010. He looked somehow both exactly like Daniel Reeves and nothing like the Danny I remembered. He was holding a business card. He had a second man with him standing slightly behind, a younger man in a gray suit whom I recognized immediately as a type even before he spoke. "Lawyer," Daniel Reeves said. "Maya?" He said it quietly, like a word he'd been rehearsing. I said nothing. I looked at him. I looked at the lawyer. I looked back at him. The eggs were still on the stove. I thought absurdly about turning them off. "I know this is unexpected," he said. "I'm sorry to come without calling. I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "What do you want, Danny?" "I'd like to meet my son," he said. "Properly. I've been doing some thinking and I have some things I'd like to explain, and I thought, If there was a chance, he held out the business card. The lawyer's name was Andrew Fitch. Fitch and Hargrove LLC, Nashville, Tennessee. I did not take the card. He's inside, I said. But whether you meet him isn't my decision to make anymore. He's 19 years old. You can knock on the door and ask him yourself. Something moved across Danny's face. Something like hope, which I found I had no particular feeling about either way. I stepped aside. He looked at the door. He looked at me. He said, "Thank you." I said, "Don't thank me. I'm not doing you a favor." I went back to the kitchen and turned off the eggs. If you've ever had to stand at that exact crossroads, the moment when someone who hurt you badly wants back in, and you have to decide not for yourself but for someone you love, drop an arrow in the comments, because that moment is one of the hardest places a person can stand. I listened from the kitchen. I heard Elijah's footsteps on the stairs. I heard the front door. I heard a silence that lasted long enough to tell me Elijah had opened the door and was looking at this man and processing. And then I heard Elijah say, evenly, quietly, in that particular tone he has, the one that sounds like absolute stillness on the surface and has a great deal happening underneath it. "You're Daniel Reeves. Not Dad. Not anything warm. A name. A fact." Danny said, "I am. And you're Elijah." Another silence. "What do you want?" Elijah asked. I set down my spatula. In 19 years of parenting, there are moments when you understand that you have prepared your child for exactly this. Not for any specific event, but for the capacity to meet it. To stand in a doorway and look at a person who failed you and not crumble. I had taught him to ask that question. I had taught him that it was always appropriate to ask what someone wanted before deciding whether to let them in. Danny explained himself on the porch. "I don't know everything he said," Elijah told me later in pieces, "and I didn't press for a complete account because it wasn't mine to have. What I know is that Danny talked about regret, about having reached a point in his life where certain absences had become unbearable. He mentioned that Cassie, the woman he'd left me for, and he had separated in 2011, and that he'd been in Georgia for most of the 2010s, and that he'd gotten sober in 2019, and that a sponsor had suggested he think about amends, and that he'd been thinking about them ever since. He mentioned he had a business, a small recording studio in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He mentioned he had some means. He said he'd like to be helpful if Elijah needed anything, financial support, or whatever Elijah needed. That last part was what did it. I was still in the kitchen. I heard the front door. Elijah's footsteps. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at me with an expression I could not entirely read. Something between tired and precise. And he said, "He wants to talk." I told him to come back at noon. "Is that okay with you?" "That's entirely your call," I said. "I know," he said. "I'm asking if it's okay with you. My son. My extraordinary, careful, precise son." "It's okay with me," I said. He nodded once and went upstairs. I heard him on the phone a few minutes later. I didn't listen, but I recognized the tone. He was talking to someone he trusted, processing it in real time. Good, that's what I'd taught him. Don't hold it alone. Find your people. Danny came back at noon. I let him in because Elijah asked me to, and because the house was mine and I wasn't going to be pushed out of it by anyone. We sat in the living room, me on the armchair, Danny and his lawyer on the sofa, Elijah in the chair across from Danny. The lawyer, Fitch, had a leather portfolio. He set it on the coffee table in the particular way lawyers set things down when they want you to notice them. I noticed it. I noted it. Danny talked for a while. He said what he had said on the porch more formally. He said he understood he had no rights here, no legal standing. He looked at Fitch when he said this, and Fitch gave a small nod confirming it, and that he was here as a human being rather than as anything official. He said he'd been following Elijah from a distance, that he'd found his way to Elijah's public academic records, to a press release about the science fair win that had been published on the Hillwood High website, to Elijah's Vanderbilt enrollment announcement in the alumni newsletter. "I've been watching from far away," he said, "and I know that probably sounds—" He didn't finish the sentence. Elijah said, It sounds like what it is. Danny looked at the table. What do you actually want? Elijah said. Specifically, Danny looked up. He said, I want to know you, if you're willing. I know I don't deserve that. I just, I thought I should ask. Elijah was quiet for approximately 5 seconds. I know it was 5 seconds because I counted them, the kind of silence that has a shape to it. And then Elijah said, My mother raised me alone on a social worker's salary. She got her master's degree while I was in elementary school, and she never missed a single event I cared about, not one. She ran a half marathon at 40, and she bought a house, and she did all of it without you. He paused. So when you say you want to know me, I need you to understand who you're asking to know, because I'm not separate from her story. I am her story. I looked at the window. I was not going to cry in front of Daniel Reeves. Danny said quietly, I know. Do you know why you left? Elijah asked. Another silence. I was scared, Danny said. I was immature. I told myself a lot of things. I told myself your mother didn't need me, that she was capable on her own. I used her strength as an excuse for my absence. He stopped. That's the honest version. The lawyer Fitch shifted slightly in his seat. He had not spoken yet. The portfolio was still closed on the coffee table. Elijah looked at the portfolio. He looked at Fitch. He said, What's in there? Fitch glanced at Danny. Danny nodded. Fitch opened the portfolio and slid a document across the coffee table. It was a proposed financial arrangement, formal, legal, drafted on nice paper. A lump sum payment of $50,000 directed to Elijah, described as a gift, with no legal conditions attached, and a proposed amended child support order, retroactively calculated, totaling something in the neighborhood of $68,000 in arrears, an amount that matched roughly the sum of 19 years of inconsistent $287 a month payments, corrected for the months he'd failed to pay and adjusted for cost of living. He was proposing to pay all of it, to Elijah directly, as an educational fund. I looked at that document. I looked at Danny. I thought about the $214 in savings. I thought about the pasta years. I thought about Patricia Okafor, my attorney, at $150 an hour. I thought about the Christmas when Elijah was 7 and wanted a specific Lego set, a Millennium Falcon, $119.99 at Target, and I had wrapped an IOU and put it under the tree and worked an extra Saturday at the nonprofit and driven to 3 stores to find it on clearance in January, $67, and watched his face when he opened it late, and how he'd said, Mom, you found it. He'd said it like I'd found something impossible. Because to him, at 7, in the particular economy of a child's perception I thought about all of this in approximately 4 seconds, and then I thought, this is not my decision to make. I looked at Elijah. Elijah was reading the document. He read it the way he reads everything, fully, precisely, without visible reaction. He turned the pages. He reached the end. He set it down. He looked at Danny. He said, I appreciate this. I want to be honest with you, though. Danny waited. The money is useful, Elijah said. I won't pretend it isn't. Vanderbilt is expensive, and my scholarship doesn't cover everything, and my mother has already done more than any person should have to do alone. So I'll accept this. For her more than for me, because she earned every cent of it twice over. He paused. But I want you to understand that this doesn't buy you a relationship. It pays a debt. Those are different things. Danny said, very quietly, I know the difference. Do you want to try? Elijah said. A relationship. Do you actually want to try? Or do you want to feel like you tried? The room was very still. This is the moment, if I'm honest, that broke something open in me. Not devastated. Cracked open. The way the best things crack open, like light coming through. Because I recognized that question. I had asked it of myself many times over 19 years, usually at 11 p.m. When Elijah was asleep and the house was quiet and I was sitting with a cup of tea thinking about the next day and the day after that and the years ahead. I had asked it when I was tired and when I was proud and when I was both at once. Am I doing this because I actually want to do it or because I want to feel like I did? And every time I had arrived, exhausted and certain, at the same answer, actually, I actually want to do this. I actually want to build this. My son, my house, my life. Actually. And here was my son asking his father that same question, like a compass passed down, like a language inherited. Danny said, I actually want to try. Elijah looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, Okay, then here's what I need you to do. I need you to sit down with my mother and apologize to her. Not a general apology, a specific one. She can tell you what she needs to hear, because whatever you and I build, it doesn't exist in a world where she's been erased. It can't. I won't allow that. The lawyer started to say something about scope, I think, something legal. And Elijah looked at him with the particular expression of a 19-year-old mathematician who has encountered an irrelevant variable and said politely but with absolute clarity, no offense, but you're not part of this conversation anymore. Fitch closed the portfolio. I looked at my son. He looked at me. We had a whole conversation in about 3 seconds without saying anything. Danny turned to me. He looked older than I'd ever imagined him looking and also, somehow, more present than he had ever been in all the years I'd known him. Like he'd been slightly blurry before and something had sharpened him, not into the version I'd once loved but into an honest version of whoever he actually was. He said, Maya, I left when you were 8 months pregnant, and I told myself you'd be fine because you were always fine. I let your capability become my excuse. I let the child support lapse because I told myself you weren't struggling, because struggling wasn't how I'd ever seen you. I missed 19 years of my son's life. I missed everything he is. And I did that to you. I did it to both of you. I am. His voice caught. He stopped. He started again. I am genuinely sorry. I know that doesn't repair anything. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I know what I did. The room was very quiet. I sat with it for a moment. With the apology, with the room, with the fact of this man on my couch in my house that I had bought and paid for and earned. With my son in the chair across from him, watching me with calm, clear eyes. I said, I believe that you're sorry. I've done enough clinical work to know the difference between genuine remorse and performed remorse, and that's genuine. I paused. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, because it isn't, but I'm also not going to spend any more energy on it. I spent exactly as much energy on your absence as it deserved, which was 0. You weren't there, so I didn't think about you. I thought about Elijah. I thought about the work. I thought about the next thing. That's how we got here. I looked at Elijah. That's how he got here. Danny nodded. He was holding himself very carefully, the way people hold themselves when they are trying not to come apart. What happens now, I said, is between you and him. I won't interfere, and I won't protect you from each other. But I want you to understand something. He is the most important person in my life, and he is also a complete person, a full, independent, self-determining person, and if you try to buy his affection or shortcut the work of knowing him, he will see it immediately. He's been able to do that since he was about 6 years old. He gets it from me. I paused. Fair warning. Something that was almost a smile moved across Danny's face. It was rueful and sad, and I thought honest. He said, I figured. Elijah said, so, do you want to stay for lunch? It was such an Elijah thing to say. Precise, practical, moving forward without drama, opening a door without ceremony. Danny blinked. He looked at Elijah. He looked at me. I stood up and went to the kitchen and started pulling things out of the refrigerator, which was not forgiveness and was not reconciliation, but was a choice to let something exist rather than extinguishing it. A small domestic act in a domestic house. Sandwiches. It turned out to be sandwiches. The lawyer left. The 3 of us ate lunch. It was not comfortable, and it was not warm, and it was not a movie ending, but it was honest, and honest is what I have always preferred to comfortable. Danny asked Elijah about his research. Elijah explained it carefully, and Danny listened in the way of a man determined to understand something outside his expertise. At one point, Danny said, "You know, I'm not a math person," and Elijah said, "I know, neither is Mom, really. She just decided it didn't matter," and Danny laughed. That laugh, the one that arrived without warning, and for a moment, just a moment, I could see what Elijah could see. The outline of a person his father might have been, or might yet become, in whatever was left of the time available for becoming. I did not join that moment. I sat at the edge of it. That felt right. Danny left at 3 in the afternoon. He shook Elijah's hand. Not a hug, Elijah didn't offer one, but a firm handshake, eye contact held. And he nodded at me and said, "Thank you, Maya, for everything you gave him." I said, "I didn't do it for you." He said, "I know, that's what makes it worth thanking you for." And then he walked down the front steps of my house on Westbrook Avenue and got in his car and drove away. And this time I didn't watch from a doorway. I was already in the kitchen washing the lunch plates, my hands in warm water, listening to Elijah move upstairs, his footsteps, his quiet, his music starting softly through the ceiling, that old guitar, a melody I didn't recognize. It's been several months since that afternoon. I want to tell you where things stand, not as a tidy resolution, but as an honest accounting of a continuing story. Elijah and Danny have spoken on the phone 4 times. They had dinner once, in November, at a restaurant in Murfreesboro, just the two of them. Elijah told me it was okay, careful, and somewhat formal, like a first few chapters of something that might become a book or might not. He's not looking for a father at 19. He already knows how to be without one. What he might be looking for, what I watch him investigate with his characteristic care, is simply a piece of his own story that he can examine and evaluate and decide what to do with. He deserves to have that access. I'll protect that right absolutely. The financial arrangement went through. Patricia Okafor, still at $150 an hour, still worth considerably more, handled the paperwork. The $50,000 sits in an account with Elijah's name on it, earmarked for educational expenses. He told me he's thinking about graduate school. Harvard has a program in computational mathematics that he's been looking at. He mentioned it casually, the way he mentions things he's already half decided. And I nodded and said, "You'd be extraordinary there." And he said, "You'd come to graduation this time?" I tiny joke. A nod to the story of my own graduation that I told him once, that he filed and kept. I said, "Nothing on this earth could keep me away." He said, "I know." He said it like he's always known. My mother, Diane Callahan, who is 71 now and living in a retirement community in Clarksville that she claims to hate and visibly loves, called me the week after Danny's visit. Trisha had told her. My mother said, "Maya, how are you handling this?" And I said, "Well, Mom," she said, "you always handle things well." And I heard in her voice something I had not heard there before, not quite pride, or not only pride, but something closer to wonder. The particular wonder of a parent who set something in motion and watched it become more than they imagined. I let myself receive it. That was new for me, letting things in. I still run 6 miles this morning before the city woke up. I still lead the team at Second Step Services. We expanded last year, added a housing stability program that I am deeply proud of. I still have the folder with the science fair email and the hospital bracelet from October 14th, 2007, and the text from Danny that said, "Heard he's healthy, that's good." I kept all of it, not as weapons, as cartography, maps of the distance traveled. Here is what I know now that I didn't know at 26. Strength is not the absence of need. It is the decision to meet your needs honestly, to build what is missing rather than pretend the absence is not there, to keep building when the work is slow and the reward is distant and no one is watching. I used to think that needing help was a failure. I've stopped thinking that. I've stopped performing in vulnerability. I ask for things now. I receive things now. That took longer to learn than anything else, harder than the degree, harder than the mortgage, harder than the litigation, harder even than watching him drive away. This isn't a story about revenge. I want to be very clear about that. Danny's regret, Danny's return, Danny's reckoning, those things are not my victory. My victory is Elijah. My victory is the house, the work, the running shoes by the front door, the life that is mine and that I made and that no absence could hollow out because I kept filling it every day with intention. My victory is not what happened to Danny. My victory is what happened to me. Someone once told me, a mentor of mine, a woman named Dr. Carolyn Pierce, who supervised my MSW clinical training and who I've had coffee with every month for the last decade. She told me that survival is just the beginning of the story. Surviving, she said, just means you're still there. What you do with the still there, that's the interesting part. I think about that a lot. I thought about it on my porch the morning Danny showed up. I thought about it watching Elijah sit across from his father and ask him directly, clearly, without anger or performance, "What do you actually want?" That question didn't come from surviving. That came from living. There is a difference. Whatever brought you to this video today, whether you're in the middle of something hard, or on the far side of it, or in that murky in-between place where you can't quite tell yet, I want you to hear this. The story is not over at the worst moment. The worst moment is just a data point. You are the entire graph. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are in your story. Beginning, middle, or somewhere on the other side. I read every single one. And if this resonated with you, if some part of this felt familiar in the way that is both uncomfortable and clarifying, please subscribe, not for the numbers, because I will keep telling these stories and I want you to be here for them. There's another story in the description that I think you'll want to watch next. It involves a different kind of abandonment and a different kind of return, and it ends in a way I did not see coming when I started telling it. Go find it. I'll be here. My name is Maya Callahan. I'm 47 years old. My son is at Vanderbilt studying applied mathematics and thinking about Harvard. I own a house on Westbrook Avenue that I bought with money I earned. I run 6 miles before sunrise, and I am here, completely, deliberately, stubbornly here. That is everything.